It's not the design, it's the brand that carries.
They can pull the plug on you at any point.
The first thing you shoot for, you're not necessarily going to love it.
Legal is just one of those things that you can't cheap out on.
Start with a strategy.
You would not know that unless you went there.
If your pricing model's wrong, that's carnage.
What are your secrets to scale? On today's episode of the podcast, I have Steve Weigler. He is a e-commerce attorney specializing in law and consulting for e-commerce brands. I know a lot of brands are really struggling with like copyright infringement, trademark infringement, like whether or not you should get a patent or a trademark. Steve and I talk all about how you as a brand can protect yourself from anyone out there that rips off your products, and not necessarily like what to do about it if it happens, but more about being proactive to prevent it from happening in the first place. I learned a lot. I think you will too. Let's get into the episode. Steven, welcome to the show. Tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Steve Weigler, and I am a e-commerce attorney. And so I started my practice a number of years ago. Had that, and it really had nothing to do with e-commerce. In fact, e-commerce, that's how old I'm getting. E-commerce really had nothing. It wasn't around. So, no, anyway, I started my practice. I really wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. And so I wanted to be a criminal attorney. I thought that was so interesting, exciting. And so years ago, I was a prosecutor in Miami, Florida. Long story short, I found out in my career that the first thing you shoot for, you're not necessarily going to love it. And it turned out to be really not something I was super passionate about. I was an attorney for a Fortune 50 company, AT&T, and really worked a lot on tech and knew a lot about the backbone of internet. Anyway, AT&T ended up getting bought, and I started my own company. And so I really, for 7 or 8 years, I was a hardcore entrepreneur. I had to raise a lot of money. I had to take a product from nothing to substantial growth and hit some various stages in the entrepreneurial journey. It was the good, the bad, the ugly. And when I exited that, it was right around when e-commerce was becoming prevalent. And there really wasn't too many people out there that were focusing on the elements that make e-commerce law special, because sure, contract and a lot of it has to do with protecting brand and intellectual property. But, there's some unique aspects to e-commerce that really some of these things are much more focused than they are in other areas of practice. Because I think, especially when it comes to marketing and branding, there's a lot of attorneys that would say, hey, I know how to file a trademark. And maybe they do. That's less than you would think. The constitution of how you put together a company, even at an early stage, is really becomes, and how e-commerce, like aggregators or private equity or whoever whatever your exit strategy, how they really kind of look at your legal and business play is all very unique in the e-commerce industry. So a lot of it had to do with timing. I just was kind of in the right place at the right time. I had the right background. And so I'd say a substantial majority of my clients are e-commerce at various stages. And my favorite thing to do really is help companies first. And so a lot of times my first question is, what's your ultimate goal for this company? And then working backwards, implement a legal protection strategy in both IP, intellectual property, and business that's going to not make me the center of attention. I know a legal strategy is not the only strategy you have to implement. I think the last thing about e-commerce law is there's some 800-pound gorillas out there, and they're not 800 pounds. They're like 18,000 pounds. I've just got out of a case where I cannot believe the power of Amazon in particular. And I worked for AT&T. It was, we were fighting monopoly cases like that, antitrust. And I've just never seen some power, the power to freeze accounts, the power to really make your break your business. And so I've been working a lot on diversification strategies with a lot of clients.
It is wild just how much these tech giants really can control. I mean, I saw a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago, leading up to Black Friday, Amazon just hit this seller with a $30,000 invoice for random storage fees, and there was nothing they could do about it. And the same can be said about Google and Meta and TikTok and all these giants that control the platform that you're just renting, right? And they can pull the plug on you at any point for any reason.
Again, I was in federal court last week, and it was kind of a last minute thing, but the judge was extremely sophisticated, but he knew nothing about, again, the market power and what happens if, like, one of these types of cases that I was involved in is filed and that Amazon would just, seize the assets, and what that really means to an entrepreneur. It's just that in the United States, because, again, there's not a huge framework of laws like there is in the EU. The courts are not that experienced in it. Amazon itself or Google, I mean, you're kind of making it up as you go along. There's not a tremendous amount of case law or even statutory law. And so we are really looking at the EU, and we're also really looking at relationships, experiences, best practices, what, bigger companies, like, again, like I work on selling a lot of e-commerce companies, and we sell a lot of times to aggregators or private equity. We look at what they're looking for as far as protection and as far as a legal plan. And I would say to your clients or your listeners that, listen, you guys, your international law, you might sound like, oh, well, that's not me. But most people come to the point where they're selling to Canada first, and then they get orders from Europe. Well, you're not going to deny those orders. So all of a sudden you are, that law does become applicable. But the good news is about international law is all kind of interrelated. And, but, you need an attorney that is kind of in the know on that kind of stuff.
You've kind of alluded to the fact that you have like some specific advice for like trying to appeal to private equity from a legal standpoint. What does that look like?
The first question I'm asking each one of my clients is, and kind of, if I'm not asking the question, I'm trying to gauge it, is like, does this person have a plan? And can I see quickly what that plan is? Can I figure out the executive summary at least? And so it might be, for example, you're selling stand-up paddle boards, and you were a lifeguard or something, and you understand, how people interact with water sports. You have to understand the essence of the play, the essence of the brand, and what ultimately the entrepreneur wants to do. But a lot of my clients are like, I sell this, or I'm about to sell this, and here's my story, and ultimately I want to exit, or I've done this before and I want to exit. So then we're looking back and saying, all right, well, what are the unique elements of your play? What is are you a solopreneur, which I love about e-commerce? A lot of them are. Are you going to have a partner? And so then at that point, okay, this is the play. This is the unique elements of the play, which would be the elements that we need to protect as much as we can. And, if we're a partner, well, I would suggest early stage that you have a really good, partnership agreement, or most likely an operating agreement, and contemplate whether, a CRS corporation is the best. The fun part is protecting the brand, which a brand is, how does a consumer identify who you are? And so a lot of times it's the name, and that's important on Amazon because that's how you get on the brand registry. Or it could be a logo, or it could be a sound, or it could be even some of the elements of design are trademarkable. And so really, when we're about to go to market, or when we're, a lot of times, an entrepreneur didn't realize this and calls me when we're at market, it's really distilling what the brand is and getting what's called trademark protection for that brand. And trademark protection means that you actually file the brand with the USPTO, and you get exclusivity to use that brand and protect against any brand that's potentially confusing in the marketplace if you're first to use in the United States. Then you can take that protection and carry it over to other places. So that's a big part of my practice, is really protecting how is a consumer going to identify who you are, because that's how you're going to usually create your competitive advantage. On the other side of that, real quickly, is the idea of patent. Patent protects inventions. So, for example, if you have the cure for cancer, well, that's an invention. Like you invented a drug. At that point, who cares what the drug is called? And a lot of drugs that you see on TV that they're advertising, you can't remember the name of that drug, which is why they have to have the 60-second commercial about it. But, so the point is, it's like, but in e-commerce, really, consumer success in this industry really the point is, it really focuses around the brand much more, how the customer identifies it, much more than you really have an invention that you're going to be able to protect in the marketplace. Now, that's not always. Sometimes people have, like, for example, I was looking at something that was like a ski carrier, like a unique way to carry skis. It was questionable, but it might be worth getting a patent if you figured out how to launch that or get the patent before you go to market. It might. It's going to be probably very expensive to protect that patent. Like if someone has a similar product on a website or like a consumer website, but it might. But I'd say for 90% of my clients, the brand, the product packaging, which is protected through copyright, anything you can do to just distinguish your product when you're launching it on the internet and growing it is really an important part of an intellectual property strategy. And at the end, we want to make sure that regardless of what the entrepreneur does, that they have a strategy, that it doesn't look like the amateur hour did and got something on a legal form. Because it's usually wrong, and it costs a ton of money to undo that. So really, again, my advice to any entrepreneurs, start with a strategy. And of course, you're not going to know the laws of trademark. That's what experts do. But you're going to know your vision.
Design patents exist, but 90% of the time, it's not worth the money or the hassle to try to get one and try to defend it. And protecting your brand with trademark is much more effective.
I'm certainly going through, well, what are the circumstances? What is your product play? And looking at, well, is the timing right to get a patent? Is it going to be an effective patent? Usually a design patent, just getting one is not like an effective strategy. But we're really looking for a strategic, low-cost approach. And I would say, 90% of the time, it's not the design, it's the brand that carries.
What happens if you go through all the proper steps to get your trademark or trademarks in place, and then you notice someone ripping off your product anyways? And I want to talk about this from a few different angles, like if it's in the US or if it's in a foreign country, like how do you defend yourself without getting into like a really expensive legal battle?
So we talked about the first step is have a little bit of a strategy. That strategy is going to grow when your company grows. Have a little bit of protection. The strategy is, what are the key elements that you need to protect? So if you're in your mind I never want to see a ski carrier that looks anything remotely like this on Amazon or even Alibaba, then yeah, I think then patent strategy might be important. I think a lot of times entrepreneurs come to the realization, if I brand this properly, price it properly, have a good strategy, I can kick everyone else's butt. Then it's really distinguishing it through again trademark and the combination of trademark and copyright and something called trade secret. But if you see that you've been knocked off, which is happening more and more frequently, number one, what you're seeing is probably the tip of the iceberg. Meaning it's really difficult to get your arms around how badly you've been infringed. And this includes for patented products. A patent doesn't give you click your fingers and everything goes away. You give you the right to sue. At least have a strategy for the worst possible case scenario. The easiest thing to do is brand. So for example, if we're the ski carrier and it was called Ski Carry, brand the product, or put the product name into the product so we can easily effectuate a takedown. Because if you have a trademark for it and you see someone else's with the same brand name, or even mentioning your brand name in the description, it's easier to effectuate. Strategically thinking before it happens is much cheaper and much easier than when it happens and you had no prophylactics. It's like, it's not that different than any circumstance in life. If you didn't think about it and you got to get yourself out of it, you probably didn't have the protection structure to effectuate much in a cost-effective manner. An example of that is, okay, well, you have your brand here, but you're focused. Your manufacturing all occurs in China, and you're doing it through a manufacturer, and you bought a die cut and everything, but you don't really know the manufacturer particularly well, and you have no guarantees that they're not going to maybe take excess and sell it to someone else. 3 things to do to avoid that in your strategy. Number 1 is get to know the manufacturer because relationships really matter in China. Number 2 is to get a trademark in China so you can carry over your U.S. protection in China. And they're more than the government in China does enforce their own trademarks, even more effectively in a way because it's an administrative process. We constantly are working with Chinese counsel. We have really good relationships. So number 2 is get that trademark. Number 3 is look at your manufacturer's contract because the Chinese manufacturers generally like to write their contracts in Chinese law, but Chinese law is not that different than American law, and we can enforce that contractual agreement if there's been leakage. And then number 5 is protect your IP, all your IP, so that it's very difficult for them to knock it off. Those are like little, relatively cheap, cost-effective strategies that you almost look at it like, all right, I'm going to put in a purchase order of $100,000. This is going to cost me another $5,000. It's almost like insurance.
Yeah.
But if most entrepreneurs, hey, I've been a startup too. I get it. It's like if you can get the $99,000 version as compared to the $100,000 version, you'll even take the 99 to save $1,000. It's an entrepreneurial mindset and my whole mantra actually is don't blow off a legal strategy. I mean, I know people, it's not the call I even want to make every day to an attorney. But it's like I've tried to make it really not only cost effective through processes, but also like I'm not around to be on your C team. Like I'm a separate channel for entrepreneurs to talk to about key business decisions, like how to protect your IP, how to protect your, how to make sure that you don't have a business divorce that just blows up into hell and ruins the entire company. How can we do that, plan that prophylactically? It's a pretty cool, pretty specialized relationship, but it's not a C team kind of like I'm involved. Me or any attorney is involved in every one of your decisions.
Right.
For example, if you were working with a client, I would talk to you or talk to the client marketing director and just find out what's your plan? Like what's the key aspects? And I can turn on a dime and tell you exactly what should be protected.
I do feel like the major downfall and the reason why so many brands get their products ripped off is because of their manufacturers in China, right? And I know this is happening. Really recently, I found out that something like that is happening with a brand that I know in their favor. So great for them, bad for their competitor. But the Chinese manufacturers, if you aren't on the same page and you're not like protecting your legal rights and being proactive and protect yourself over there, I mean, they're going to share your formula and they're going to follow the money, right? If someone else is coming in and placing big orders too, I mean, they want those orders, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, but in a way,
and I think the solution to that is like be present. Like, when was the last time you went and visited your manufacturer in China? If it's in China, it could be somewhere else, but
I couldn't agree more.
If you're not there, like if you go there, like they can't hide something like that, right? If they're manufacturing for your top 5 competitors, you would not know that unless you went there.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of telling them either in a formal contract or, again, and sometimes it's a purchase order that just has terms on the back, but, telling them that this is protected and this is protected in China also. So I think that usually puts a chilling effect on their willingness or interest in knocking you off. But I can't tell you enough on how specifically that culture, that relationships really matter. Especially before COVID, I was encouraging, and a lot of my clients listen to me, that at least you make one visit to the factory and break bread. That's not a particularly Chinese concept because they don't need a ton of bread. But the concept of breaking bread, of really building the relationship, getting to know them, that could be a once every 5-year kind of thing. You go over, you build a relationship. You don't have to go there every year, but you have to know the people you work with. And I had to do the same thing in building my international legal relationships. I was exhausted. I don't travel that much. But I've had to, I've gone to China, I've gone to all over the world, like, to build those relationships and now they know me, I know them. And we can talk on the telephone all the time, and we can trust each other. I've seen that a lot, especially lately, a lot of entrepreneurs kind of giving the need for a quality manufacturer relationship kind of short shrift. Because sure, you can order on AliExpress. And it really depends on your product. But in my opinion, you want to be in it to win it, even if it's even a lifestyle business. And in it to win it means that you put together that framework, and it could be legal, it could be marketing, it could be operational manufacturing, but you put together that foundation that's really strong, really solid. It might not be much of a house, but the foundation is there, and then you can really build off it. What I see in the legal side is that a lot of people, I make most of my money and a lot of people kind of short shrift the foundation process, and then issues occur. Well, issues occur. It's not a particularly calming way of making a living, but I put out fires. Like, I know how to do that, and it's intellectually stimulating to me, and that's how law is created when there's a dispute. But my advice and my favorite thing is that there are processes, there are ways to make this really inexpensive if you just kind of know what your focus is and protect it along the way. And then it's really like you can then focus on something else. And I think, Tanner, you really hit it on the nail on the head when you talked about, going over to China, or at least breaking bread if somewhere to build those relationships. Because especially in China, those relationships mean everything.
Yeah, and that can be applied to anything in business, right? I mean, they're so crucial, but kind of going along what you said, like, being proactive is really the difference between spending a little bit of money to prepare or losing a whole hell of a lot more if something blows up in your face.
I think sometimes it's the toughest discussion ever. I'm surprised how well some of my clients take it when they're past the point of no return. I would say in general, business is full of carnage. If your pricing model's wrong, that's carnage. If you branded it wrong or you branded it in the wrong place, that's carnage too. Same with the legal strategy. It's like, there's a reason, say Amazon has like 800 attorneys. I don't know about 800, and then tons of law firms. So you need one for a couple hours. It's like, it's all incremental, but that doesn't mean you need none and you'll blow that part off. And same with nailing, consumer marketing or ordering channels or 3PL, or like, you can go on and on and on. You get it wrong, that might mean the business isn't going to make it.
One thing that I've learned throughout being an entrepreneur in the last 5-6 years is that legal is just one of those things that you can't cheap out on. Like, truly, it's like insurance, like you said. I mean, preparing yourself for the worst and having a plan as to what'll happen, like getting a freaking operating agreement when you go into a partnership with a partner, right? It's such an easy thing to do, relatively inexpensive, but it could save you potentially millions.
But that's an area where I think a lot of entrepreneurs short shrift the process, and I think, the state Secretary of State websites, whatever, they make it seem like it's so easy. When I started practicing, my first entrepreneurs were like they were partners. They're like, no, nothing's going to ever happen. We don't want to spend the money to write out this really lengthy operating agreement. Well, 6 months later, the things that they said weren't going to happen happened. We didn't really have the right operating structure. We really didn't have the right, they punted these questions down the road, and it ended up being like a lawsuit that lasted 3-4 years, and it barely resolved. So it's really like, that is something that entrepreneurs really need to think about if they're not solopreneurs, or if they're taking on money to private equity. I can speak from or venture capital. I took on venture capital in my last company, and I have lots of experience with venture capital. And I'd say, and I was cheaping out. And I come from a legal background, so I get the entrepreneur side on this. I just see the carnage all the time. These things really have to be thought out. It's much better, and especially in business relationships, partnerships, capitalization. It's always easier to do when everyone's getting along, right? At the beginning, everyone thinks it's going to work. Otherwise, why would you do it? So it's really easy then. But, it's not usually the time that a lot of entrepreneurs are focused on, well, let's get this relationship right. They're all excited to get to market. And again, I'm not that different. It's like, if it's between $1 marketing and promoting and growing my business, I'm into spending that dollar much easier than, some other dollars that I spend around here. So it's not like I don't get it, but it's like, the reality of it is you need a little bit of thought, a little bit of strategy, and then, work with attorneys that aren't going to cheap you out or cheap out. There's some really big law firms out there, and they have a big nut to cover. So it's kind of like, find a niche that is appropriate to you.
Right. I mean, if I'm an e-commerce brand, I want someone in my circle that understands the in and outs of trademarks from an e-commerce perspective, that knows what to look for in terms of downfalls with manufacturing agreements, or in some cases, licensing agreements. There are so many downfalls associated with just hiring some random attorney, right? And that's why I was excited to have you on the show, because this is really, really important stuff that a lot of brands could potentially be overlooking right now. So thanks for sharing all that advice. But I want to ask you, what are your secrets to scale?
To really be a good business owner, you need to, not everyone thinks like you, and you really need to get it into little buckets that A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, goes to E. And so it's almost dummy proof. Taking big concepts and boiling it down to those various pieces. So I'll give you an example. Trademark is almost something that every entrepreneur needs. You need, unless you don't have a brand. And again, if you develop the cure for cancer, you don't really need a brand. But still, most entrepreneurs need one. So we took the total, we call our trademark process total TM. And actually finding and researching and prosecuting a trademark is actually quite a process if you do it right. And so there's software involved, there's a lot of judgment calls. There's dealing with the government, there's an amount of time it takes, sometimes you get something called an opposition where someone actually sues you to remove your trademark. It's just quite a process. So we took it and and I'm still doing it, is distilling it to be, so every consumer, every client gets the same customer experience at a fixed price, and we're not cheaping out in any part of the process, but still making it cost effective. Well, we've had to boil down that process so many times to make it better and better. So many of my staff's hours have been in really just, all right, what is this service exactly giving us? What does the report look like? And then if we have the report, how are we creating the the search letter without spending, 8 hours on it. So it's really extremely, everything should be process driven. And especially, and that's my own internal team and some software. Think about it when you're dealing with a third party warehouse or having to put in complaints to a random person at Amazon. Then you really need to make sure that your processes are in place. Otherwise, you're going to have, it's going to be all the entrepreneur's time and you're never going to be able to move forward.
My secrets to scale are people and processes. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you said there. And I've come to the realization that as an entrepreneur, I'm more of the creative visionary and I really suck at processes. Like I can visualize it in my head, but when it comes down to like sitting down and like mapping it out and creating it and documenting it, I'm terrible at that. And it sounds like it's not your favorite thing either. So you have your team help you out with it.
At the beginning, I avoided it like the plague, but now it's everything. I listen to a lot of podcasts about, with successful people. And if you're trying to build something, there's some things that you just have to grit, bear it, and get through it. And so,
of course,
these process discussions, I really don't put off anymore. I really, kind of just jump into it, treat it like a project that's going to end, and then just get it done. I think the end goal of the process is to be able to articulate it to anyone. So if, God forbid, something happened to me, that the process would go on tomorrow just the same way.
You're exactly right. So, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's a great way for anyone listening to get in contact with you?
So we offer free initial consults, and you just email me at SWEIGLER, Weigler, at EmergeCounsel, COUNSEL.com, or on our website, EmergeCounsel.com. There's a place to book an initial consult. So, and there's I'm an extensive blogger, and there's a ton of resources and information on our website about a lot about processes and the work we do.
Steve, thanks again so much. Really appreciate it.
Sure, Tanner. Always good to see you.